All right, hello everyone. Let's start to code the landing page for VS Code. There are easy bits to this, there are hard bits to this. If you remember from our original class, we sort of coded the easy bits, which was, let's say, these two sections at the top. The hard bits, if you remember from then, was actually, positioning elements left and right, or, even worse of what's happening here. Something is on the left, something is on the right, and this is also divided into three parts. So we're going to slowly build up to this page. If you compare this page with the Visual Studio landing page, they look fairly similar. Of course, the Visual Studio landing page is much longer, which should be easy to build once these concepts of positioning. Maybe this part will be a little difficult to build, but everything else should be similar to what we're building today. What we'll do is we'll go through 6 assignments and then eventually try to reach this final Visual Studio Code page. The 6 assignments will, as you can see the names, let you understand how do you align items. That's one difficult bit in CSS, aligning items next to each other. The other difficult bit is styling them, which is actually, not that difficult. If you understand CSS ke primitives, like there is some border radius here. When you hover over it, the color changes. There is some padding over here, padding over here. This input box has an outline, so on and so forth. That is the easy bit. We'll go through that as well. First, let's try to go through all the assignments, and I would urge you to try these assignments yourself. If you understand Flexbox a little bit, you should be able to understand these. Only the grid assignment should be hard because we haven't yet discussed grids. All right, let's look at the first assignment. This is what you have to build. I've also mentioned this in the README, but high level, you have to build something like this. A div that's in the center of the screen with 1200 pixels. Why are we doing this? Well, as you can see, Visual Studio Code also has a 1200 pixel width, all the elements in the center. This is generally true for most websites. On a wider screen, they will try to squeeze everything in 1200, 1800 pixels to make sure it just looks prettier. Not everything should be, shoved towards the end, which is why, even on, if you go to projects.nextsteps.com, well, I wish this was also built that way, but this should also be, somewhere, as you can see now, it looks better when you minimize it, right? Versus if it was built like Visual Studio Code is, it would go down like this. This is much better than this if I decrease the zoom. So common pattern is to centrally align everything and, not have it take the complete width. That is what we're trying to emulate here first. There are various ways to do this. Let me take you through the one that we are taking. Let me show this final website to you first. This is what it looks like. Div in the center of a screen, it says hello world over here. But there are 3-4 approaches you can take to do this. One, if you remember, let's look at the code first. What does it do? It has a div class equal to container, which has background color of red and a width of 1200 pixels. That makes a lot of sense. We want the div to have 1200 pixels of width, background color of red. And there is this one extra thing over here that you might not understand. Let me comment this out for now. Then there's the actual content that we're giving a height of 500 pixels so that this content div is 500 pixels in height. This is what it looks like. It is not centrally aligned, unfortunately. That probably means this line of code is making it centrally aligned. How? We'll see very soon. But do you remember the center tag? That might just be one way to do it. If you remember in the very first class, we discussed there is this center tag also. Even though this is highly depreciated, you shouldn't use it. But that also does the job if I put it in the right place. There you go. Centrally aligned in the screen, a div of color red. Sounds good. Seems like, we have what we need. But as I said, there's a fancier way of doing this. And there is a third way of doing this as well, using Flexbox. Try that out. We've already discussed this in the class. But let's try the sort of clean way. A single line of code that does everything. Margin 0 auto. How is this single line of code centrally aligning this red div over here? Before that, what does margin 0 auto mean? Until now, we have done this. Okay, margin, let's say 100 pixels. That means there is a 100 pixel margin here, 100 pixel margin below, 100 pixel margin on the left, 100 pixel margin on the right. If I put high there below it, you will see there's a 100 pixel margin before high there appears. So If you write margin and some number over here, that is how much it will be padded horizontally as well as vertically. But if you add two of these, then the first one is how much padding should be there vertically. The second one means how much padding should be there horizontally. So margin 100 pixels, 400 pixels is the same as doing margin dash top 100 pixels, margin dash bottom 100 pixels, margin dash left 400 pixels, then margin dash right 400 pixels. So if this feels hard to chew, you can also do this. Same thing only. First element is what comes up top and bottom. Second element is what comes up left and right. If I refresh and if I remove this first one, it still works. Now the question is, what happens when I replace the left margin with auto and the right margin with auto? I say, can automatically figure out the left and the right margin. In this case, the browser kicks in and the browser gives equal padding or margin in this case to both the sides. This is why it is centrally aligned with a single line of code. If I write margin 0 pixels and auto, which is the same as me doing this, I can comment these 4 lines and have a single line of code, or I can comment this line, have 4 lines of code. If I refresh, left and right, we have the same padding. Why? Because we have said कि भाई horizontal padding to is auto. That is how you can horizontally align a div. Hopefully that's simple. Again, there are 2 other approaches I've shared. The first one is just using the center tag, and the second one, let me quickly code for you. But we've discussed this, so I'm not going to dive deep into why this does what it does. Flex, justify content center, and that should do it. Let me turn off my AI. It becomes super irritating very quickly. All right, /div. There we go. And here. Now if I refresh this, it does the same thing. If I remove this line of code, still we are centrally aligned. I have removed this. Still we are centrally aligned. Why? Because I've set display to be flex and justify content to be center. This guy will make sure all the divs that I have, I repeat, if I add another div here, hi there, all of these appear right next to each other, first one and second one, and justify content center will make sure all the divs are centrally aligned. If I remove hi there, then we only have a single child, just like China. Very bad joke. And that is centrally aligned over here. All right. That is the first assignment. Hopefully that is straightforward. Second assignment is do something like this. Now take hello world both horizontally and vertically to the center of the screen. The biggest question, you might have heard this from time to time. It's a ongoing joke ke center a div. Memes all around. Okay, one does not simply center a div. I don't always have to center content in a div, but when I do, I always forget how. This is like, it's not really difficult. You can Google it, but the point is, it's such a small task that can sometimes boggle your heads. So let's do that next. Again, there are multiple ways. Let's first open this specific HTML file. So I'm going to go to one vertical align and open this. It does what we're supposed to do, but how does it do it? Let's look at the code. Sorry. What does it do? It first has a container only, margin 0 auto, background color red, same as before. Content, I don't think you need this either. Height, and here we've added margin 0 auto, which also you don't need. Yeah, that's fine. And then we have a class called vertical center, a class called horizontal center. This is one of many approaches to take. This is a slightly bad approach because it will nest your, structure too much. There's like too much nesting going on here, but it does the job. It is vertically aligned. It is horizontally aligned. Why? Because after inside content, this is what we had earlier, right? This is what we had earlier. And the problem with this was this hello world was left aligned. What I'm doing is I am wrapping this hello world First inside a div that vertically aligns everything, then inside a div that horizontally aligns everything. If I remove this one, then you will see it is only vertically. It is still horizontally aligned, surprisingly. We'll debug why that is. Vertical center, if I remove this, then it's not. What exactly does vertical center single class do? That makes sense. Flex direction column. I have an align items, that's why. There you go. Forget what align items does. I had an align item center here. That is also another approach you can take. That's probably a cleaner approach if I'm being honest. But this, if I just have a vertical center that does this, display flex, which means the children that you have, they need to be put right next to each other. Justify content center. Take the complete height. We want to make sure this vertical center div takes the complete height. Only then the first child of it will be vertically aligned, in the center. And the most important thing, which we haven't yet discussed, is flex direction. You can actually flex in horizontal direction as well as vertical direction. The reason we have to do this flex direction column, let's look at it. Let's try to understand it a little bit deeper. ये जो vertical center class है, let me add some style here. Background, color, yellow. Okay. This vertical center class, I have now added a background color of yellow. If I refresh, you will see it has the complete height as well as the complete width. This vertical center div, this div right here, takes the full height. Why? Because I added height 100% here. If I don't, then it will only take this much height, as much height as it needs. But if I force 100% height, what have I done? I have forced 100% height for this guy so that the first vertical child that it has, I repeat, this guy has one child right now called, h1 hello world. I want to vertically align it centrally, which is why I have written flex direction column ke bhai, you will have multiple children in the vertical direction and they should all be in the center. If I add another, h1 over here, right next to the hello world, I add another hello world. You will see both of them are centrally aligned. If I add a third hello world, you will see all three of them are at least vertically centrally aligned. तीनों vertically तो center में है. Why? Because of this much code. What is this code doing? It is saying that you will have multiple children, put them right next to each other vertically. You might say, Kirat, फिर तो flex करो ही मत. Don't do flex, just do this. Yes, you can do that. I mean, at least vertically, they're the same only, right? Vertical direction में putting flex does nothing really. Why? Because anyways, they would appear one below the other. Horizontal direction में, if I change this to row and refresh, then makes sense. All three children are now in the same line. But if I make flex direction column, then they were supposed to appear one below the other. Otherwise also, now also they're appearing one below the other. Yes. But it gives me the freedom to do this. Justify all three of them at the end or at the start or in the center. So just how you can do flexbox horizontally, you can also do flexbox vertically. That is exactly what we're doing here. If you refresh, vertical alignment is done. Horizontal center alignment is the same as the last slide. The flex approach that I took. Let me see what's up here. This div. There you go. I just want to make sure one thing. All right. Horizontal center क्या कर रहा है? The same thing I showed you in the last slide, which was display flex, justify content center. Don't even need this. Display flex and justify content center. What is the other approach we can take? Margin 0 auto does the same thing. So pick and choose which one of these you think is better for you. You can either use margin 0 auto or you can use the flex approach that I shared in the last slide. The third thing can be what? the third thing can be I'm going to use the center tag only. Either one of these will both vertically and horizontally center your text inside the div. So first we are centrally aligning the div, then we are centrally aligning the text inside the div. How are we doing it? We have declared a class called vertical center. What is the vertical center class doing? Display flex, justify content center, height 100%. Why do we need height 100%? Because if I don't, then this will just take this much height. It is still vertically aligned. देखो यहाँ पे space and यहाँ पे space is the same, but it is not taking the full width, full height, which is why it's not here where it should be. If I do this, then yes, it is over here. Similarly, for horizontal, what have we done? For horizontal center, margin 0 auto is the best approach, I would say. The same approach we discussed in the last slide. All right, great. Done with 2 assignments. Third assignment is going to be a little tricky. Not too tricky if you know flex by now, but if you don't know flex, then yes, it'll teach you something extra. Let's get into the third assignment. It says you have to do this. Can you think of a way to do this? Left div takes, let's say, 33%. Right div takes 66.6%. Make sure 33% appears here, 66% appears here. Take a pause and see if you can code it yourself. You might not be able to. You might have to Google about flex-grow. So Google about this and try to build something like this. Then come back to the video in like 10 minutes if you're not able to do it. All right. Let's see how we've done this. Oh my God, I've zoomed in too much here. The third assignment solution looks something like this. We have a top level container. Then we have a left div and a right div. Fairly simple stuff. If I just do this much, add no classes, then this will look very messed up. Let's see what it looks like without any styles. Let me open this in Chrome. It looks so ugly. It does not look anything like it's needed. So what should we do? We need to use Flexbox for sure. We need to put these divs right next to each other. So if you look at the classes that we have created, the top level container, number one has width 1200 pixels and margin 0, auto to make sure it's centrally aligned. It now also has display flex and justify content space between. You actually don't need this, but let's keep it. You also don't need this. This much is good enough, so let's just stick to this. Keep the total CSS really small. The left class has a background color red and sets flex grow to be 1. This is a new thing to learn. Flex grow 1. The right has flex grow 2. Can you guess what flex grow does? If I hover over it, see, sets the flex grow factor. Negative numbers are invalid. What is the flex grow factor? How much should this child grow? If I set both of them to be the same, then this will take 50% of the width. This will take 50% of the width. If I set flex grow to be 2 on both of them, then they're both taking 50% width. If I set it to be 1 over here and 5 over here, then the right one will take 5 times as much width as the left one. And what do we need? What did the problem statement say? Okay, this should take 33%. This should take 66%. So what can I do? Flex grow 1, flex grow 2. If I refresh, that's how this specific div should appear. So hopefully this is clear. Why are we doing this? Because we're slowly building up to this guy right here. Can you see this is taking 1/3 the width and then 2/3 the width? To be able to make this, we are slowly trying to build up our divs. All right. Hopefully that's clear. Next is another way of doing the same thing by using grid. What have we used until now? Display flex. Grids let you do the same thing and actually much more. What is a grid? If you've heard of grids in the past, a grid is something like this, right? It's like a matrix. So you can break your app down into, some small rectangles like these and place elements inside. That is what a grid is. And grid is actually a much more flexible way to position elements because it lets you position elements vertically, horizontally, lets you do a bunch of things that flex doesn't. So if you have an extremely complicated layout, right? Let's say something like this. You can still do it in using flex, but it's generally a good idea to use grids to do it. If you have a extremely complicated layout that looks like, let's say this, then using a grid is not the worst idea in the world. You can still do the same thing using flex, but your life will be a little easier if you use grids. All right, let's try to see how we can build something like this using grids. Let me go back to 4-complicated-grid and let me open this in Google Chrome. Oh, this is the complicated grid, my bad. We need to first go to 3-grid layout and open it in the browser. Still looks the same, but now uses what? Uses display grid. It uses display grid, and rather than having flex-grow over here, it has grid template columns. Okay, what should the two columns' width be, or more specifically, width fraction be? This should take 1 fraction of width. This should take 2 fractions of width. If I change this to 2 as well, can you guess what would happen? They take equal widths. If I change it to 1, then this guy takes 33% of the width. 1 out of 3. This guy takes 2 out of 3. One more thing that grids provide you is this property called gap, which basically is this gap right here between the grids. If I make this 1 pixel, then this becomes really small. If I make this 10 pixels, this becomes slightly bigger. So that is how you can create the same thing using grids. Why would you want to use one over the other? You can actually do everything, maybe not everything, but like a lot of things with flex that a grid provides you. But I've never really built extremely complicated grids to find a use case. I've actually been introduced to grids recently only. I've only always used flex to put elements in the div, but someone in the last class asked, okay, can you introduce grids? Which is why, this is the alternate approach that I wanted to share. For a more complicated layout like this one, let's see how grids can be used. Again, you can use flex here. You can do the same thing using flex, but let's look at the grid approach to create something like this. You now have enough knowledge to be able to do this. So again, would urge you to try this yourself. Take this as the base code, the third one, and try to code this yourself. What does this guy do? Firstly, let's open this and see if it does what the screenshot said. Seems like it. There is something on the left, there is something on the right, and there are 3 columns over here and some big text over here, some small text over here. Why are we learning this again? To be able to build this section, big text, small text, 3 columns, each one of them having something. So we're slowly trying our way to, make something like this. How have we done it? Let's look at the code. The code says there is a div with class set to container. What is this div doing? The container class. Firstly, the width 1200 pixels, margin 0 auto, display grid. And it says it's going to have 2 children. First one taking 1/3 the width, second one taking 2/3 the width, and gap of 10. Very similar to what we did in the last one. The left div, what does it need to do? It's fairly simple. Left div doesn't have to do much. Just background color of red. If you look at the left div, background color is red. Div class equal to flex. Why are we doing flex here? What is this flex class doing? Let's see. It doesn't exist only. We don't need this. My bad. I don't know why I added this. We can remove this. If I refresh, it looks the same. We have the div where, first we have written left over here. It is an H1. It is horizontally, centrally aligned. What does the horizontal class do again? Again, it can do this, or it can do margin 0 space auto, which is slightly cleaner if I'm being honest. And then there's another div which has an H3, which has a bunch of text. So the left div, I'm assuming, is straightforward to understand. The container uses grids to have 2 children. First child just takes 1/3 of the width and has fairly simple code written over here. That is what renders this thing right here. Right one is a little complicated. What do we need in the right one? We need 3 columns. Can we use flex? We can. But grids will make your life a little bit easier. If you open the second child over here, what do you see? Div class equal to grid1 and all the children written one next to the other. If you use flex over here, right, your logic would look something like this. In that case, it will become a little more, it will get nested a little bit more. Grids will make your logic a little bit cleaner. What does this grid one class do? Display grid and grid template columns. I need 3 columns, one FR, one FR, one FR, all 3 of them having equal width. And if I refresh, column 1, column 2, column 3, column 1, column 2, column 3, all of these divs appear right next to each other. Cool. That is how, you can use grid to create something like this. Can you do the same thing using flex? Yes, you can, right? You can do something like this. Style equal to display flex, and have the first 3 children appear right next to each other, and then do the same thing over here, and so on and so forth. You'll see, as you can see, column 1, column 2, column 3. Just set the width to be full. Flex grow 1, flex grow 1, flex grow 1. You'll see all 3 of them positioned very similarly. But it's just a little. It'll become sort of. It's not hard. Actually, it's the same only. I mean, you get the idea. It's like not too hard to do it the other way. As I said, I've been doing it that way for the longest time. But now that I've learned about grids, they seem more elegant to solve these specific problems, which is why I'm going to stick to the grid approach over here. All right. Too many things done. A lot of things covered in 4 assignments. Let's write some real code. Let's now write the code to do this. We already have this. How difficult do you think is it to change the background color, to change the font that is available, and the size of the font, the color of the font, to add a bunch of images and some text right next to it? Rather than having simple text, add an image and a text. Shouldn't be too difficult, right? If you have the starter code, you just have to add normal styles. Now you figured out the difficult bit. How can you position things like this? The easy bit is changing the background colors. Let's see how we've done it. If you look at index.html, firstly at the body level, I've added a background color of black and a new font family. This basically means what fonts do I want to use? I want to try to use Arial. If that doesn't exist in this browser, then sans serif, and then I can add a bunch of more fonts. I can also add external fonts if there is some specific font that I want. Okay, yehi wala font I want to use that doesn't exist in a browser by default, then you can add that as well. Let's look at what this looks like in the final website. It looks something like this. Looks fairly close to what we want. We want something like this. On the Visual Studio, that's my local code. Let's look at what VSCode.org looks like. It has something like this. We also have something fairly similar, right? Their font is a little bit better. We are using some default browser fonts. This is gray in color. This is white in color. Fairly simple to fix. But this thing on the right, this has a blue color. We have a white color. But it's fairly simple things to fix. How have we done this? Again, we have had a starting code. We just added some more styles on top of it. What are the styles? Let's see. Body we changed. Container remains the same. Only I added a background color black rather than a red. And hard coded the color to be white so that everywhere rather than having black text, we have white text. Language panel is a new class that I added, because the reason I've named it language panel is because the final code uses these classes. You can also use left and right, but these are slightly more readable, right? Dot language panel is slightly more readable than left panel and right panel, which is why this is what I've named it. What is the language panel? It is this right thing over here. The right div we are calling language panel. The left div doesn't really need a class because we're not doing anything fancy here. No flex, no grids. We just need, one h1 after which we need a bunch of text. So this is what we have put here on the left side. On the right, there are a few things. We'll get to what those are. But let's look at the container first. Container, display grid. First column needs to take 33% of the width. Second column needs to take 66% of the width. If you look at it, this guy is taking 33% of the width, this thing right here, and the right guy is taking 66% of the width. If you look at the code, again, the language panel, height, display grid, grid template columns, one fraction, ke bhai have 3 children over here or 3 columns over here, and then some padding over here. One more thing I've done, and this will also give you some more insight as to what this is. Abhi tak we've only written this dot language panel or the img tag. What you can do is any image that is inside the language panel class. I repeat, if you go down, this is an image tag that is inside the language panel class. Only for those images, add these styles. I repeat, what does this mean? Any parent that has a language panel class which has a child which is an image tag, for that guy, add these styles. Harkirat, why can I not do this globally? Right now you can, but then in that case, if you had an image tag over here, then this image tag will also get these styles. So to be able to restrict कि यार ये जो image tag है ना, only the ones that are inside language panel, only this image tag and this image tag, only they should have this 40 pixel width, and then other images can have their own widths. To be able to do that, we write this syntax, and you will see this fairly often in the final code as well, which is why you should get comfortable with it. What does it mean? First class के अंदर image tag के अंदर a tag, you can keep going like this. And if every condition is met, only those elements the style is applied to. If there was a tag over here, then this would have meant you can't put an a tag inside an image tag. But you get the idea. Let's say it was language panel and then div and then code. I repeat, it was language panel के अंदर जो div होगा, उसके अंदर जो code होगा, only that specific code element should have these styles. For that, you do this. You have the first top level selector, then the selector inside, then the selector inside. Cool. That's pretty much it. If you look at the language panel, rather than having simple text call 1, call 2, call 3, what do I have? I have slightly complex div, which has class flex. What does class flex do? Sets the display to flex, has the image followed by the text. Image followed by the text. Cool. That is how you build this section. Now can you build the whole thing? Can you have a similar grid over here? Image on the right, text on the left. This is a button. This is a button, has some padding. This is a text element which has, some extra outline over here. A bunch of texts, when you hover on them, the color changes. Title and then, an image over here. Can you now build this? Given you understand how to build this, is this and this slightly simpler to build? Try it out. That is the actual assignment for you now. The code is over here. This has the code, but try to understand the code. Difficult bits would be .navling.hover. This is something we haven't learned. But can you guess what this does? If something has a class of .navlink, and you hover over it, its color changes to white. These probably have a class of navlink. If you hover over them, they become white in color. That is what this :hover over here does. Similarly, header followed by h1. Whatever is inside the header, whatever has h1 inside, have margin 0 over there, font size 2em over here. And if you want to get really fancy, I have commented this now. We'll discuss this later on. But if you uncomment this code, your website will become responsive as well. What does responsive mean? Basically means right now, if I make this really small, it'll look a little ugly. If I make this small and then you keep going, as you can see, the website is very ugly. Versus if I uncomment this responsiveness bit, which as I said, we will eventually learn about. So don't worry about it just yet. The website becomes a little, not too responsive. Not too responsive, but slightly more responsive. When you go really small in width, you can see, this came above and then your image came after, so on and so forth. But again, this also isn't very well written now that I look at it. But yeah, we'll get here when we get here. Cool. Try to build this yourself. If you don't, if I'm being honest, it is fine for now. But once we reach the tailwind bits, you should revise this and, then start to actually style websites, because no one uses raw CSS today. But these are good primitives to know of before we actually reach tailwind. Cool. With that, let's end it. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.